and he goes on procession through the principal streets of his own town. At times people hoot at him, they throw stones at him. So it's normal. Once it's politics, and you have a section of the population supporting you, another section not supporting you, these things are bound to happen. For some of us, we think, or some people have said that it's also an indicator of the measure of your popularity as a leader. And so it's a kind of a wake-up call to the managers of the campaign for the president, because...
But that's obviously happened in the stronghold of the opposition party.
Well, but then they have been touting this idea of increasing their tally by 1 million.
It doesn't matter.
And for me, analyzing from a distance, I think it's one of the issues that they must take attention.
How disgruntled can one be to go to this extent of pelting stones at the convoy of the president?
Good morning to your viewers, and let me say that when such issues occur, we usually handle it politically, because in Ghana everything is politics, and this is where I want us to try and look at it as an individual, not as maybe any political party behind whatever.
Well, but already
the
NDC is accusing the NPP.
Yeah, and this is where I get a bit concerned. I know it could be. I'm not saying that it couldn't be. It could be, but then let's look at it as an individual who has thrown stones on someone else. If someone throws stones on me as I drive down here, I can call for the police to arrest the person. So if we put it aside as President Mahama being the president of the country, the first gentleman, we should treat it as a crime, not try and solve it politically. So settling it from political point of view, or trying to find political solutions to individual crimes is always not going to be the best. And in Ghana, we tend to do that. This is disgrace. Just as Mr. Kwapon said, Dr. Kwapon said, I think there's been some historical precedents on some of these issues, and we should be very, very careful if it is coming from a particular region of doing that. If you disagree with someone, it does not give you any right to stone the person. We can solve issues with, how do we say it in Akan? Whatever the case is, there can be dialogue. And in this case, if it is political, as it is being viewed at, then you still have your term. It's not been cut. We have just few months for you to show that you don't agree with the president. I think this should be treated as a crime and should not be looked at as a political party behind anything.
Let me take your thoughts on this.
I think it should be flatly condemned. By no stretch of imagination can this be justified, as Doc Riley put it. Even if you were to segregate or distinguish the office of the president from the person of the president as an individual, it is wrong. It's an offense, to pelt stones at a person, and so it is unlawful to begin with. Let alone, doing that to the first gentleman of the land. It is not good. Somebody, as has been, reported, somebody could have easily been injured, or as somebody was injured.
Well, just to guide you, one of the ladies, Gloria, who's the NDC parliamentary candidate for Ejeso, was said to be among the people who sustained injuries. The affected vehicles had also had their windscreens broken. Now, it's interesting to know that the stone throwing incident occurred in the evening when electricity supply to Asotre and the nearby towns had been cut. Ketsi Dumso. The people who threw the stones therefore reportedly took advantage of the dark nature of the place to carry out their diabolic mission.
As I said, it should be flatly condemned. You can't justify it. Property has been damaged. Injury has been caused to lives. So you cannot justify it. Now, the penchant to quote and unquote, degenerate such discourse into political or partisan politics is where the problem is. And that has been our bane, particularly since 1993, when we transitioned into democratic rule. Everyone, wants to take political advantage of one situation or the other. And by so doing, perpetrators of offense are never punished. If you recall the murder of Yana, we still haven't found the culprit simply because it was reduced into NPP, NDC. We still are struggling to solve our electricity problem because it's been reduced into NPP, NDC. We are still struggling to solve the many problems that face us in the educational sector because it's been reduced to NPP, NDC. So the moment you reduce it, in fact, as we sit here, okay, none of us carry a party card, yet our comments will be reduced into NPP, NDC. And to a very large extent, some people say, he carries an Ashanti name, so he's an NPP. He carries an Akuapem name, he's an NPP. So we are not getting any solution to the problems we face in this country. And Doc said it. People say, because it happened in Ejoso, and Ejoso is in Ashanti region, the perpetrators are NPP. I mean, we are not making any headway. We've reduced our politics, our country into political divides. And now Ghana sits in isolation. So it is all of us against Ghana. Nobody is defending Ghana. People are defending personalities because they belong to political parties. So we need to move away from that. Doc pointed to some historical antecedent. I don't think that it is the precedent that presidents are stoned. These are isolated incidents that have happened in this country. Right. And so it must be viewed as such.
Right. But let me also quickly say this, that you see, it happened about 3 months ago when he was hooted at in Kumasi. It was reported. I don't know how true it was. And this time around, it's stones. So I'm naturally, and everybody else should be concerned, because then
it's aggravating.
Right. All right. So we should, and the leaders, be they traditional or whatever in Ashanti, must be talking to their political supporters.
Should the police be acting?
Of course, it's a crime to throw stone at another person. Yeah, so the police.
But come to think of the fact that this was done in darkness, so
the police
have to know
they have
see the
means
people
of conducting intelligence and picking up those involved. I must also say that prior to the visit, there had been several comments, like the poster of one of the NDC commentators in Kumasi, to the effect that they are prepared to meet whoever will want to embarrass the president boot for boot. It wasn't good, because when you say that, you kind of incense people to do what they think they have to do. On the other hand, you see, politics is a game, it's a very complex game. I've been in student politics before on campus, and at times you preempt certain things, and when they happen, you go to confirm what your suspicion was prior to the event. Why were they saying all this? Does it mean that they had picked information regarding the intention of a section of the population in Kumasi to want to embarrass the president? And the poster, NDC taking a certain a particular name, the chairman of MPP in Kumasi, Wuntumi, so they were rather kind of stoking the embers, and I didn't think it was helpful enough. Okay. So the hallmark of a good leader, a political leader, is tolerance and self-restraint. So the leaders across all divides must be talking to their supporters to exercise restraint. Otherwise, they embarrass everybody. They embarrass the presidency, the president, their own party, and the other parties, and the multi-party democracy.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to tie that in with the story on the front page of the Daily Graphic newspaper, and which says, never, Ghana will not quit IMF program. That's according to President John Mahama. And he had met with the Asantehene, I think. Yes. So I'll just read a bit of that. It says, President John Mahama has reaffirmed the government's commitment to successfully complete the International Monetary Fund program. He said the government had no intentions of quitting the 3-year extended credit facility program, especially when the consolidation and reviews were on course. Now, the president gave the assurance when he paid a courtesy call on the Asantehene Otumfuo Osei to the Menchia Palace yesterday as part of his accounting to the people tour of the Ashanti region. Now, the finance minister, Tekbe, is said to have buttressed this same point when he earlier spoke to the Daily Graphic, and he said that originally we expected the IMF Executive Board to review and approve Ghana's economic performance under the third review in June 2016. However, we have been made to understand that this step will be taken as soon as a number of new prior actions, which are conditions to be met before the IMF Board meets to approve the review introduced by the IMF after the mission in May 2016, are satisfied. Now, some of the new prior actions include the approval of the PFM law by Parliament, the approval of the amended Bank of Ghana Act by Parliament, a strategy to address the debt and financial situation of state-owned enterprises, the completion of an exercise on the reclassification of government accounts for the production of consistent and reconciled fiscal accounts for 2015, the completion of work on the strategy for banks recapitalization, and the approval of the Banks and Specialized Deposit-Taking Institutions Law by Parliament. And quickly, the President urged the IMF to work expeditiously with the Ghanaian authorities to take the third review report to the IMF Board, given its implications for Ghana's international market activities, including the refinancing of the sovereign bond that was issued in 2007. I'll start off with you, Dr. Francis Ajani Boateng. Yes. So I think that some had said, there were some suggestions that because this year was going to be an election year, government was going to quit the program, and that's essentially what the president sought to clarify.
Yes, I think I'm not a financial person, so the very details and the very fine details as to whether we should quit or not, I'm unable to comment individually. But in any case, if we look at, I'm going to look at it from the broader perspective.
I mean, largely, the president seems to suggest that it has been worth the while.
From the economy, as I see it at the moment, IMF has to do with finances. From the economy, as I see it, to the people of Ghana, I'm not sure we are actually feeling it. But sometimes you don't get the benefit right away for policies which are implemented. If anything at all, then the recommendation will rather be renegotiating some aspects of the policies being implemented from IMF, but I can't speak to specifics. I'm not an expert in that area.
Dr. Francis Ajani Boateng, Nana J. Bavriwa, of course, when you look at the fiscal deficits from 2012, we seem to have made some incremental, improvements. It's been narrowed down since 2012 when we had the twin deficit till now. There appears to be some, stability in there.
I'm not too sure of the differentials. I'm not too sure whether the deficit has come down.
It has.
It has. Now, then what it means is that obviously we are making gains, but at whose expense? Now, you see, we cannot discuss IMF without putting into proper context, the course of where we find ourselves. Now, if you recall, until the 2012 elections, we were good in terms of our deficit, in terms of government, in terms of inflation
right,
and so on and so forth. Then 2012 elections came. There was huge public expenditure by government. People thought that it was one of the ways by which government wanted to,
win the
elections. And that has been characteristic of election year. But this particular one seemed to be, quite outlandish. And then subsequently, if you recall, there was a meeting at Flagstaff House between the president and our donors, where they were very annoyed with the way and manner we had spent. Now, moving from there, they had been reluctant to support Ghana financially. One of the reasons, and they required of us a lot of things. One of them being cleaning our cleaning ghost names from our payroll and checking government expenditure. Subsequent to that, it led to the ballooning of our debt stock, which meant that government needed to increase taxes and so on and so forth. So government internally was taking certain steps, but subsequently they felt, they needed to subscribe to an IMF program. Having done that, it had, increased a lot of the hardships. Why? Because of the IMF conditionalities. We are not clear that that kind of expenditure which ensued in the 2012 elections will be repeated. For now, it seems as though it is not being repeated. And we are waiting to see how it picks up going forward. But if it is repeated, obviously we are going to be thrown out of gear. And so, therefore, it would come to a catch-20 situation. But if it is not repeated, then we are likely to see a more stabilized economy. Now, when you look at the effect of this program on the Ghanaian, you would also want to see how government itself, apart from some expenditures which were considered unreasonable, in the 2012, they are not being repeated. You'd also want to see, for instance, government cutting down, cutting down the numbers in terms of even ministers. Look, from day one, I have maintained that we needed to see some sort of commitment on the part of government. That, look, you people would have to go through hardship by way of taxes to make sure that we pay this debt. My commitment to you is that hitherto, I would have wanted to have about 70 ministers, but now I want to have 60 ministers. So it shows that I've cut down drastically. Hitherto, this was government expenditure in terms of budgetary allocation to a place like the presidency. Now I am cutting down on it, just so Ghanaians can associate with the presidency, with the government, and say, look, yes, even as we are going through this kind of hardship, government is also cutting down its expenditure. So then we will know that we are heading towards, or it's a mutual effort towards stabilizing our economy and making things better. But when you say we should tighten our seatbelt, we should tighten our belts, and yours seems loose, then there's a problem. Okay? Now, when you look at, for instance, government is looking at debt consolidation. Now, let me give you a simple analogy of running a business. If you are running a business and you are struggling in terms of financial inflows, right, i.e. revenues, you would want to pursue your debtors. You would want to pursue your debtors. Ghana government has got debtors. We have got debtors by way of those who took money in the saga. How are we collecting that money? Look at the laxity that we've given them in terms of repayment. Okay, we've got debtors in terms of the recent bus branding. Okay, look at the laxity that we've given them in terms of repayment. We've got debtors in terms of Woyome. Okay, look at the laxity. Okay, if you put all those sums of money together, they are quite substantial. Indeed, they are not too, in terms of comparison, they are similar to what IMF is offering us. Okay, so what are we doing to get that money back? So people would want to see this.
I mean, just like the finance minister said, we had originally expected that the IMF team would approve our economic performance under the third review. Unfortunately, there are a number of prior conditions that we need to meet, which includes how to finance and restructure the debt of a lot of these state-owned enterprises, and a few other things that we need to put in place until that is approved. And mind you, this has implications for our next Eurobond. I mean, when you come to think of the coupon rate, we're likely to get on it. The last time we went into the market, we got about 10.75, which was quite outrageous, a lot of people thought. So, I mean, there are clearly a number of things we need to do as a country.
Yes, I agree with you. I think you would want me to talk about what we need to do in terms of sustaining our IMF program.
And even at all, but you see that we've made some progress.
Yes, we have made progress.
Okay.
But I'm looking at it in terms of, one, can we become a very mature nation that will not repeatedly run to the IMF? This has come about as a result of mismanagement on our part in terms of the public.
That is clearly established.
Now, I'm also looking at it in terms of reducing the hardship, the burden on the Ghanaian. I mean, it is without shred of doubt that the IMF program has resulted in a lot of burden to the Ghanaian, because government will have to generate revenue through taxation. Now, by so doing, taxes have been increased. Look, for instance, only fuel, about 70% of taxes on fuel. Now, taxes have been increased on electricity tariffs, which has resulted in high utility tariffs. Now, I am looking at how can government, or how would government avoid the situation of having to increase these tariffs. Now, if government can generate other revenues, okay, it can, because all government needs is money. Now, if you can get other revenue sources, then you wouldn't have to increase these tariffs. What are the other revenue sources I'm talking about? I'm talking about people who owe government money. Who are those who owe government money? I'm talking about that Agam group, who took money from the SADA and have agreed to certain repayment, and that repayment is one which I call extremely flexible.
Okay, just hold on your thoughts to me. Let me just quickly go to Dr. Ebekwapon. It appears that despite the benefits of the IMF program, there are clearly some challenges. I mean, on the world market, for instance, the price of crude oil and other commodities don't appear to be doing quite well, and many think that the finance minister is likely to go back to Parliament for perhaps a review of the budget. Don't you sympathize with government?
Well, I do sympathize with government. The big question to ask is, why will you, in the first place, go to IMF? Or why will you want to go to Parliament to seek approval to increase expenditure? We go to the IMF because we've not been able to balance our books, and therefore we need some rescue. So that we take refuge in the IMF. And the IMF says, before you come to me for help, there must be conditionalities that you should meet. Some are not very pleasant at all. You have to exhibit financial discipline, physical discipline, ability to control your budget and your expenditure wherever. And invariably, it leads to a requirement for you to do an introspection and see where you haven't been disciplined enough, and to,
we have seen the removal of subsidies.
Yes. So then, the government is compelled to remove subsidies. Government is compelled to look at state institutions, ask for restructuring, rationalization of staff, and all that. When that happens, people lose jobs. And it creates more tension in the country and pressure on the government.
Even the story on the front page of the BFT, 250 million cedi debt suffocates Ghana Water Company.
That's right. So it's all a matter of pushing governments to be more disciplined in managing the resources of the country and in controlling expenditure, basically. Otherwise, right from independence, year after year, there is a budget deficit. We run to our donor partners, we run to IMF for support. It shows that perhaps we are not matured enough to manage our own countries, manage our own resources. And so this assurance coming from the president that he will not quit is very reassuring. In spite of all the frustrations, in spite of all the clash of or conflict of interests, right now his preoccupation will be with sustaining power for the next 4 years. At the same time, IMF says you cannot go overspending, and so the government must, or the president must be finding himself in a very tight.
But personally, do you see any gains at all?
Well, in terms of credibility of the nation, you see, when the IMF intervenes, immediately it gives you a certain credibility in the financial markets, and therefore they can grant you loans, they can give you grants, they can do other things. So for me, we need IMF touch to have that credibility within the international community. So that is a gain. It also tells you that you are prepared to exercise the required discipline in managing the resources of your country. So for me, these are the gains. All right. It might have been very difficult for government to freeze employment in the public service, but they have done it for the past 5 years, just so they can control their budget. So yes, there have been gains. It means that state-owned enterprises are being compelled to come up with strategies for internally generated funds, so they can, sustain certain payments and motivate their staff. For me, that is good. necessity is the mother of invention. When you are hard pressed, you begin to think outside the box. So for me, it's compelling us to be more innovative and creative in managing our economies.
But you know, if you've got to restrain expenditure, there's a bit of worry also that's likely to affect growth.
Yes.
But look, we went to IMF because we owe. Is the debt coming down? It's projected that
it is.
It's projected that by the end of the year, debt to GDP will be around 74%.
Epic.
Okay. Now, if debt to GDP is going to be around 74%, then of course the situation is not getting better. Now, if debt to GDP is around 74%, especially when we would have to generate more taxes to service that debt, then it means that the impact on the Ghanaian is not going to be lessened, or it's not going to
come to think of our 5th Eurobond, which the president said, you know, this IMF approval of our 3rd review has implications for refinancing the sovereign bond that was issued in 2007. I think it's maturing next year or so.
It's maturing. So you want to ask yourself, the kind of investments we make with these loans, with these Eurobonds, can they sustain itself? Can they repay itself? Those are the fundamental questions. I'll give you an example. Last year, right, GMPC borrowed $700 million. When GMPC borrowed $700 million, we all thought that GMPC did so because it's doing well and it can repay its loans. This year, GMPC has gone to Parliament to ask for money, parliamentary approval. You know, they want money. Okay, where is that money? Where did that money go to? And GMPC, on our tax, on our fuel levies, there is a percentage for GMPC.
Did they borrow or they guaranteed?
Who? GMPC.
Yes.
Yeah, they borrowed $700 million. It became a huge matter. It went to court as to whether or not GMPC had the capacity to borrow under the constitution of this country without parliamentary approval. It was in court. And so if you look at a company like GMPC that borrows $700 million, okay, and then after a while or a year down the lane, it is in Parliament to ask for government financial support, then there's a problem. Now, all these things would have implications for the ordinary Ghanaian, and that is what I want us to look at. If we are embarking on an IMF program, and then we had cut down public borrowing and then public expenditure, then that is where you can say that the program is doing well. But the very reason why we went into the program, we are still perpetuating it. As I said, apart from the GMPC, for instance, look at TOR. When TOR accrued huge sums of debt, Ghanaians were made to feel the brunt, right, through the TOR debt recovery levy. So whatever they do up there, it comes back on us. Okay, so you can never divorce the impact of such programs from the hardships on the Ghanaian. They are very, very significant. And when you are projecting debt to GDP at 74%, and you want us to say that the IMF program is doing well, it's doing well because the IMF, per their review, has seen debt consolidation and so on and so forth, I wouldn't want to accept that. I think that government expenditure ought to come down. Government would have to make sure that there's value for money in terms of government projects. Government will have to make sure that monies that the investment that it undertakes with such loans, right, they can repay themselves. Look, I give you the example of a country like Portugal. Portugal is really under serious economic crisis. Why? Portugal had undertaken all forms of infrastructural development. Look, if you go to a place like Portugal, you can be standing on a motorway, well-constructed motorway, for close to 2 hours. You only see one car on it. That should tell you that it was a needless investment. But because of the huge investments that they made, They suffered huge deficit, and as a result, the Portuguese economy is seriously struggling, in spite of the monumental infrastructure that you might find in a place like Portugal. Now, if you juxtapose or if you transpose that to Ghana, what you find is that, yes, there is some investment going on in terms of infrastructure and so on and so forth. But can they repay itself? This has led, as I said, to the ballooning of the public debt. Now, we are not sure. People are saying that cocoa has started doing well, gold has started doing well, and some other commodities. But
it recently picked up.
But the fluctuation of the prices on the world market, that alone should tell you that we cannot rely on that, okay? Because it is not for sure that we are going to have stable prices. Anything at all can affect the prices of such commodities on the international market. So if they are your sole source of revenue, then you are in for trouble.
Let me go to. Sorry for passing you. Let me go to Dr. Francis Ajinin Boateng. You have some thoughts to share on this?
I would rather be speaking from common sense point of view rather than the technical explanations that Nana and Doc have given. There is something that really baffles my mind, possibly because I'm not a finance person, and it has to do with even the simple budget that we normally provide every year. You look at expenses and look at revenue, and you always find expenses being more than the revenue. I'm bringing it down to what we are discussing. If the expenses is more than revenue year on year, I have looked at all the budgets that we have had for so many years, and there is one basic issue of the expenses always being more than revenue. And the explanation given is that we'll have some foreign investment and foreign intervention, IMF and the rest. And it continues to baffle my mind, because if I bring it down to my home, if every year the budget I have is more than the revenue that I generate, then simply I'm going to run into deficits. And this basic thing, I really can't get my head around it. That how come that as a country we always have expenses more than the revenue? And this is what has led to IMF and others coming in. So truly, I think we should be thinking about generating more in the country rather than relying so much on what we call the Euro bonds. And I wouldn't have the nitty-gritty understanding of all this, but let us rely basically on our small-scale industries in the country, and that is what will give us the money.
All right. Thank you.
Just to add that anytime IMF comes to our rescue, they are looking at the public sector and how to control costs in the public sector. I would want a situation where they would rather come and look at our private sector and see how best we can help entrepreneurs grow their businesses so that there will be employment, there will be revenue, there will be income, there will be taxes, and then, because if you are running a business and you want to declare good profits, you control your costs, good. But you can also increase your revenue. And at the national level, increasing your revenue is creating an enabling environment for businessmen to operate. And when they operate and their operations are profitable, then you can also get your revenue by way of taxes. So they shouldn't focus always on cost control, but they should also go and come in with interventions that will grow private business in this country.
I think that it depends on the timing when they come in. You see, for instance, this time they came in at a point when commodity prices had gone down. If you recall, in 2000, between 1999 and 2000, there was a similar problem where Britain decided that it was going to release its gold reserve onto the international market, which led to the drop of gold prices on the international market. What that meant was that our primary foreign income, generation element, which was gold, the prices had come down. Okay, so when IMF came in, obviously you are steered towards austerity. Now, it is not just Ghana. Even when Britain started facing problem during the recession, it went into austerity all over the world, and it is very natural. Even in our homes, when you don't have a job, or when your job revenues or income drop, you need to, you are steered towards austerity. But as I said earlier on, Ghana, our problem has been that even when we are in austerity, it looks as if the citizens are the ones that bear the brunt. Look, let me give you a very simple cycle.
Sorry, let me just tie that in with the story on the front page of the BFT, which says that zero deficit financing is premature, and that's according to the IFS. And let us read a bit of it. The central bank's move to halt its financing of government deficit effective this year, as directed by the International Monetary Fund, has been described as premature by economic policy think tank, the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Now, according to the 62 states that the total of loans, advances, purchase of treasury bills and securities, together with money borrowed from the government, from other banking institutions of the public at the close of a financial year shall not exceed 10% of the total revenue of a fiscal year in which the advances were made. The central bank in 2012 financed government deficit to the tune of 2.2 billion cedis, which was more than 13% of the total revenue recorded in that fiscal year. The executive director of the IFS, Newman Kosi, speaking at a news conference in Accra, explained that when we say it's premature, we mean that the drastic cut is not in the interest of the country, because whether Bank of Ghana finances government or not, if the government intends to run a deficit, it will do it via the issuance of treasury bills to pay for the deficit. What do you make of this?
I think it goes back to the same government expenditure and generation of revenue by government. But what for me is very significant is the breach of the act that says that government cannot borrow in excess of 10%, from the Bank of Ghana or so. I mean, it looks as though there does not seem to be any punitive consequence for breach of the act, and that is where the problem is. I think if the law can bite harder, maybe it will reduce that kind of practice.
No, but if you hear what the IFS is saying, that it's for them it's a bit premature, and if whether government wants to spend above, it can still do with the issuance of treasury bills and government securities. So really, coming in with that law, to get it into force now is for them.
Maybe it is not just that law. Maybe it is also about Parliament that scrutinizes some of these borrowing, because this is primarily looking at the domestic market.
Yeah.
And so if you look at Article 185 of the Constitution, where Parliament is supposed to scrutinize almost every international loans, then Parliament has the opportunity to ensure that government complies with the act. And so therefore, if a loan comes and perhaps it does not fall into the aspirations for the passage of this act, then Parliament can also scrutinize and say, look, we are not going to pass it. But is that what we are not likely to see that, right? In this system where you hardly find anybody, even within a ruling government, standing up against government, we are not likely to see that. It's going to continue. And so it looks as if our own conduct is defeating the very laws that we pass and the purpose for which we pass them. Okay, we are not achieving much because of our own our conduct. Now, if we are to be more patriotic and say that, look, at this point, if we borrow, it is going to throw the country into hardship, maybe it will stop. As I was saying, perhaps it's because the politicians think that no matter the debt, the citizens are there to pay. That is why probably they are doing what they are doing. Because if you look at our governance system, it is, yes, we cause all the losses, the loans, we accrue the loans, and then when we have to pay, we go to the citizens, then they will do so pay by taxes. Now, it is very easy to govern that way. It is very, very easy that let me accrue debt, let me spend, no matter how I spend it, if there is huge sums of debt that ought to be paid, I'll go to the citizens because I have the power. Pay tax, pay tax, pay tax, pay tax, pay tax. I think that it is that very easy to govern that way. We need to go beyond that. Doc was saying that, look, perhaps the IMF can help us in growing our private sector. What I get from what he said was that we can expand our economy so that we can have huge sums of revenue to repay our tax. Brilliant, okay? But if you don't manage it well, you will still have to generate taxes, especially in our case. And that would lead to the collapse of various sectors, various industries.
Dr. Kwapon, I find it quite interesting, the press conference by IFS suggesting that, you know, as a developing country, we cannot suggest that the central bank should not finance government deficit. We're not like the US or the UK, you know. And so, I mean, you know, the whole idea is to help in the Bank of Ghana's own inflation targeting so that we don't have too much liquidity, you know, in the system, which could consequently lead to prices going up. And the IFS is saying that, listen, prices going up is not as a consequence of too much liquidity. I find that quite interesting.
Well, yeah, liquidity in the system will lead to inflation, and so it's basic, we understand. But they are saying that there should be mechanisms to control liquidity in the system, and who has or the fiscal policy of this country, and who has responsibility for that is the Bank of Ghana. Now, the question to us is, are we allowing them a free hand to do what they're expected to do? Do they have the guts to resist government borrowing? Can they do it in reality? On paper, it's beautiful, but can they do it in reality?
Should they do it?
They should, but unfortunately, we haven't had very strong leaders, strong governors that will resist government pressure to you know,
in
release
the past,
money.
we had governors bouncing government checks.
Well, perhaps 1 out of 10 or something, because then we're also looking at your job, the security of tenure of your own position. You see, so for me, it's all beautiful. I mean, for instance, why shouldn't Parliament be able to enforce our own laws? Like he said, before you take any foreign loan, come to Parliament, let us approve. But when you have overwhelming majority of parliamentarians on one side, the government side, what do you do? You see, when we were in school, there was this idea of controlling liquidity in the country. And then Achampon strangely said that, is he God, kind of, to be able to do all these things? We took it lightly, but then he was saying that, look, the laws are there, the controls are there, but how to enforce them becomes difficult. You enforce them to your detriment. Enforce them at this stage in your political career to lose an election. Do you get what I'm saying? So at times, yes, the structures are there, the processes are there, the laws are there to be enforced, but who to enforce them becomes an issue. How many people have appeared before the Public Accounts Committee and wept? People have wept, you know, regretting what they have done by way of government expenditure, their failure to control. But what happens to them? I believe, I don't know, lawyer, that perhaps the Public Accounts Committee has the power to help draw people to the law courts.
They don't.
They don't have that power? Oh, okay. And then how about the Auditor General?
Yeah, he
has the power.
recommendations.
How many times have we dragged people to court for misapplying funds?
He doesn't have to even drag them to court. He needs to surcharge them.
Surcharge them.
To their salaries.
Yes.
And so on and so forth.
All right. Dr. Ajani Boateng has been a bit quiet, so we're going to move on to some other story, a rather contentious one, I guess. It's on the front page of most of the newspapers today. It's about the EC presenting the list of NHIS voters to the Supreme Court. And all right, so let me just take a bit of a story. So the Electoral Commission yesterday presented to the Supreme Court a list of people on the electoral roll who registered with National Health Insurance Scheme cards. On social media yesterday, we had a lot of figures being bandied around as to what the actual numbers are. But should this bring finality to all the debates and a back and forth on this issue about NHIS card holders? I'll start off with you, Dr. Ajani Boateng.
If we talk about EC, I think there's been mixed reaction when it comes to the performance of the EC. I know Madame Charlotte Osei has not been at the hot seat for long, but if you look at what has happened over the past year, then there is always going to be a lot of talk about her performance. There hasn't been some sort of what I would say, excellent performance. And from one side, you could say that she's only been there for 1 year, but does she have to wait for the apex court in the country to order her to do this? This is where my concern will be, but not just whether she's or the EC is able to present the list or not. The numbers here don't matter that much, in my opinion. But what matters is, should they be more proactive than reacting to the issue of the Supreme Court having to order the EC? I don't think this it serves us really very well, because if you look at the history for the past, say, 1 year, MPP came up with the list of people who didn't qualify, Togolese and others, foreigners, on our register. And then EC reacted to that. Again, another major issue of having to clean the voters register. After the, was it 2013 or 14, 2013 ruling by the Supreme Court that the voters register is bloated, I think EC should have taken the decision to do this on their own by not allowing the Supreme Court to order them. So my concern is not going to be about the numbers. My concern is that EC is not being proactive, but it is only reacting to situation, and that will make the EC's work really very difficult.
Lawyer, will this calm nerves?
In terms of procedure, I think that the plaintiffs may have, for this particular case, they may have come to an end in terms of procedure at the Supreme Court, because there has been judgment, and the courts, they had gone for clarification because of the many divisions in opinion as to what the judgment entailed. But I don't think it might be the end. I don't think it might be the end, because the petitioners may want to interrogate the numbers.
Do you get the suspicion that they have an idea of what the numbers are?
Earlier on,
you see, in court, they had said that, yes, they had an idea of the numbers. When you look at the Attorney General's response to the case, they have stated that the numbers were quite huge, and to delete them would result in the disenfranchisement of large number of people. And so if the figures are not that significant, then the question will be whether or not the figures as presented by the EC is a true reflection of what is on the ground. Or is it a case that the AG couldn't have spoken for the EC, and therefore what the AG said could not have been the EC's position? Now,
was the AG seized with the facts before submitting to the courts?
Well, I don't think that it would be unethical for you to have said something that you didn't know. Why would you take a position which is an uninformed position, especially when you are making a representation to the court as a lawyer?
Then it promises to be interested in courts, because per circulations on social media, like I said all throughout yesterday, some figures appear to be circulating, and if it's anything to go by, the numbers are quite insignificant.
They are quite insignificant, and what that would mean is that the petitioners may want to find another avenue. The plaintiffs might want to find another avenue for the interrogation of those numbers. Is it a case that we are going to see Abu Ramadan 3, Abu Ramadan 4, no 3, because this is just clarification. Yeah. So is it a case that we are going to see Abu Ramadan 3? I suspect there's not going to be an end to this.
That's a quick point. There must be an end to litigation. And come to think of the fact that, look, we've got about 3 or so months to the next elections. Are we really ready for this?
Yes. I worry a lot about this whole issue. What mischief were we seeking to cure in all this? There was a perception that the register was bloated and there should be ways of cleaning the register. One political party specifically said that, look, you've looked at trends and percentage figures of eligible voters in every country, and ours is way above the average. why don't we go for a new register? The other side resisted and said that, oh no, we agree, yes, there is something wrong with the register, and we need a credible register to go into an election. But then we won't go your route. We rather prefer a process of cleaning and deleting. Somebody sends the whole matter to court. The court says, yes, there is a...
In fact, mind you, before the court, the Electoral Commission itself set up a committee that came up with findings and recommendations.
Yes. And the recommendations were that, yes, you find ways of deleting names that shouldn't have been on the register in the first place. They started the process. And there was a huge information gap. EC was not telling the public what was happening.
What it was doing.
Yes. And people were getting to see what was happening because there was that suspicion that the register was bloated.
Because the stakes in this year's elections are indeed
very high. So it's been going back and forth. Now, when we are not sure about an issue and we are arguing, we need an independent arbiter. So then Abu Ramadan goes to court, and to the highest court of the land. They have given a judgment, and the judgment appears to be a bit controversial. One party says,
"Did it appear to be controversial?"
Or well, I shouldn't say so. I mean, the parties themselves
made it
gave different interpretations. Why Abu Ramadan was saying that specifically they were asking you to delete ABC, minors, foreigners, whatever. The other party said no. They only said that, yes, we agree that there is a problem with the register, but use the existing laws to clean the register. And what did that mean? So there was a bit of controversy, all right. That's why they have gone a second time. Now, lawyers may be wearing different lenses, but for the voter and for a politician, he's seeking to find out whether indeed the register is bloated, by what percentage or what numbers, the absolute numbers, and how are you going to delete those numbers. So for me, this is a test case. We want to see what the Supreme Court will say. What the Supreme Court will say in terms of deleting those who went in with NHIS cards. Now, like you said, the stakes are high. Interested parties will want to find out whether indeed, you knew you have a process for identifying those who registered with the NHIS card. Already people are saying that it's impossible to do that because if you look at the various forms, it doesn't tell you who registered with passport, driving license, or NHIS. So it's going to be a lot of speculation and suspicion within, mistrust within, distrust without, and I worry about that. And so let me say this, that at the beginning of this whole process, I thought if you had the means of raising some money from our donor partners, we should have gone for a new register to save us all these problems, which we didn't do.
I'm sorry, let me go to Dr. Hajenim Boateng. Dr. Hajenim Boateng, some have said that as far back as Abu Ramadan 1, which was about 3-4 years ago, the EC should have started taking steps to ensure it had cleared all these supposed irregularities. See, we've got just about 4 or 5 months to elections. Seriously, you think that we have the time to get all these people to come back and re-register? Don't you think it's going to affect even the number of people? Because, I mean, if we have about 4 million people, eventually, if it's established, we've got about 4 million people who voted with NHIS cards, you think all these people will be encouraged to go back and re-register?
I think this is going to be really very tough, and it comes back to how we are analyzing it. And for me, given the opportunity, I will not look at it very general, because if you look at the two political parties, or the two main political parties, MPP and NDC, it has been between two regions. Ashanti region, NDC complaining that underages have registered, MPP complaining that in the voter region, foreigners are on the list. I would rather do what Doc was proposing, what we call trend analysis. This is not very, very difficult. It's just a matter of looking at the death rate, the birth rate, and then doing very simple analysis of 1992, the number of registered voters, 1996, 2000, 2004.
And do we have accuracy? Do we have accuracy in those figures?
Yes, and then look at where there was a jump, a big jump, because this changes we're talking about didn't happen in 1992. Nobody complained about it. So it could be assumed that 1992, 96, or 2000, they were credible somehow. But now we are talking about a very big jump all of a sudden. If you do this for various constituencies and districts, you should be able to pick where we have had instances of jump, and we can then deal with that. Rather than going general, we do not have the time. We only have 3 to 4 months to do that.
Even when you do the trend analysis
Yeah.
and you identify that big jump, it wouldn't still explain who should not be on the register. The fundamental question is who ought not to be on the register but has found himself on the register. You are looking at those who by the constitution do not satisfy the criteria of eligibility, and to those who are dead. I mean, these are the issues in contention at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court simply gave an order for an immediate deletion of the names, which resulted in huge debate as to whether or not there were such others. Now, they are in court for clarity. Are we going to, because for the dead persons, there seems to be a figure which the committee of experts that were with, and that figure was 600,000. Okay, the minors, we don't know the figure, and then the NHIS, we are yet to find out the figure, because the EC has just presented it to the Supreme Court. Now, after today's hearing at the Supreme Court, what is going to happen? I don't think that the application for clarification to the Supreme Court can resolve any issues respecting mistrust over the numbers that the EC may have brought. And that is why I said we are not likely to see an end in sight. We are likely to see Abu Ramadan 3. And then the Abu Ramadan 3 perhaps may be an avenue to have the plaintiffs have the numbers interrogated.
It's fast coming up to 8 o'clock. I'm going to ask a general question so we can wrap up on this segment. And I'll start off with you, Dr. Kwapong. Okay, the EC, doesn't it look like a schoolboy who is standing before a mistress and being suggested what to do and what not to do? What happened to autonomy? And I think that's the argument some people are raising, that is the Supreme Court not usurping the autonomy of the Electoral Commission?
Well, I really sympathize with the lady, what's her first name? Charlotte Osei. Her circumstances are unfortunate. She's new in the job. She's not been allowed to settle down and run the show. And there are so many issues coming left, right, center. And the whole question of the independence of the Electoral Commission has been raised. And the extent to which now the Supreme Court, the highest court of the land, is giving
Or
instructions.
maybe perhaps the independence of the EC has also over the period been overrated.
Very well. But then we cannot run away from the fact that when there is an issue and we need interpretation, the Constitution provides that you go to the Supreme Court for that interpretation. And so now the EC has exposed itself to a certain amount of attacks to the extent that we need the Supreme Court to come in. But I know that the laws are very careful in handing down judgments. And I suppose they are the wisest team of people in the country at this point in time with respect to the issue that we are discussing.
Right. Mr. Ajani Boasen, your final thoughts on this subject?
All right. The president appoints...
Could you quickly address the subject for me, just on the question of the autonomy of the EC?
Yes, the president appoints the EC. In this case, it happened during the era of the NDC. And so the NDC president appointed the EC.
Our president.
Yes, our president. Yes, appointed the EC. Thank you for the correction. So there is always going to be a suspicion by other parties if a decision is made by a person appointed by our president. Okay, so political parties, in my opinion, should distance themselves from the work of the EC. After all, Afarijan stayed in power for so many years, about 2 decades or so, but still couldn't explain overvoting.
Right. Okay.
So we should give the lady some time.
According to you, you couldn't explain overvoting. That's according to you. Okay, so what about for quickly?
I don't think so. You see, when you look at
in just a minute.
I don't think so. Our Constitution gives our constitution is the supreme law of the land. And if you look at Article 2, Clause 1 of the Constitution, the Supreme Court has been vested with the power. So they are the guardians of the Constitution, which is why they have the exclusive jurisdiction, the power to interpret and enforce the Constitution.
Thank you for time. Thank you very much, Mr. Iwaba as a legal practitioner. Thank you also to Mr. Francis Ajanin Boateng, and then also to you, Edward Kwapon, CEO of HR Perspective. That's how we wrap up on the newspaper segment.